Thank you. As I said, we'll hold questions. Next is Tim Hubbard talking about Genome England.
Right, thanks very much. It's very nice to be in Leiden. So the 100,000 Genomes project. So here's the sort of history. The key thing, I think, compared with a lot of projects here, which are really research cohorts, is this is inside the health system. This is an NHS transformation project. Obviously, we have a national health infrastructure. So it's about treatment more than it is about research. It's focused on areas which we think is low-hanging fruit. There's a possibility of using whole genome sequence to lead to clinical benefit, so that's rare diseases and cancer. And the timeline is that it was announced by the Prime Minister at the end of 2012. Genomics England was set up as a wholly owned company of the Department of Health in 2013. We ran pilots last year, and the main program has been running from this year. Now, it's got a variety of different objectives. Obviously, partly it's to do whole genomes and get treatment from those into the health system to lead to health improvements. It's also flagged, though, to stimulate activity within the UK economy around genomics and genomics spin-outs and companies. It's got a time-limited existence, Genomics England, till end of 2017, but the objective is to leave a legacy of infrastructure in the health service so that after 17, the health service can work out how much whole genome sequencing it wants, but it's got that infrastructure in place to use that. And of course, it's also meant to enable research as well. So this is the kind of treatment structure that we've constructed. This is pretty much all in place. Has this got a pointer? Maybe not. So in the middle is Genomics England. It's a very small organization. It's more really a contracting organization because the sequencing is done by a contract with Illumina after a bake-off to evaluate different sequencing technologies. The source of samples for the pilot, this was really through research collaborations, but now it's been moved to being a full contracted part of the health service. It's NHS England, which runs the UK, the English health service, has contracted with a set of bidders from hospitals, hospital consortia, to produce 11 genome medicine centres, which involves around 75 hospitals. So they are under contract to consent individuals based on eligibility criteria, collect samples, collect phenotype data. The DNA goes to Illumina, the phenotype data goes straight to the data center. Data center is also a procured contract in terms of the location and certainly a lot of the compute. So you end up with data in there. Then in terms of interpretation, we're trying to stimulate commercial interpretation services. So we ran another bake-off around genome interpretation. We've selected a subset who could bid to do our initial contract. They're still being essentially under observation to work out who's doing this best. So we're trying to produce a competitive evaluation of those services as we deploy them as well. So that will produce a clinical report that goes back into the health service where, of course, there's verification. So you look at this and you might think, well, so where's the research? So the research is an add-on to this. Actually, I should talk about data models first. So one of the key things that has been developed, I think, which makes it different, is the collection of phenotype data directly from the health service. So the health service got a responsibility to produce this in a structured form, either written in directly or extracted from their EHRs. And they also they can only put patients into the system that fit with the specified list of diseases and the eligibility criteria. So we don't want to do whole genomes where there's an existing test. We want it to be shown that this patient has had the existing test. It hasn't produced a diagnosis in the case of rare diseases, and so then it's gone on to be part of this additional layer. So these data models are being constructed there's currently about 120 rare disease definitions, each with a data model and an eligibility criteria. That's structured in a model catalog. It's all XML, and so an interface has been built which the health service as a whole can use to enter this data, but because it's XML, they can also integrate it directly into their EHRs over time and extract directly. The consent around all this is novel in the UK. The protocol, because it's under a new designation called bioresource, and the idea here is it's both treatment and research simultaneously. So there's return of results, there's recontacting the individuals, which allows this flexibility to do both things. And so that leads to the research side. So there's this data center, which is where these interpretation services will run. No data is going to go out of that data center. It's all, the companies have to bring their algorithms essentially as virtual machines and run them inside there. It's exactly the same for the research side. So the research groups are organized. There's two consortia. There's the Gene Consortium, which is a set of companies which are going to get almost like a SNPs consortium looking at the data. Again, they can't take the raw data away. But the biggest thing is the Clinical Interpretation Partnership, which is just being set up. This is a bid to set up a kind of consortium around, on one side, each disease area, on the other side, cross-cutting activities to improve analysis. So, and they'll also have access to a biorepository sample because that's also being collected at the same time as part of the contract with the genome medicine centers. So the clinical interpretation partnerships, on one side there, it's expected that they will help drive up interpretation coverage, because maybe the best we'll do for rare diseases is 50% diagnostic rate. What about the other 50%? But the other, of course, is just to generally have a large set of data to do research on. They have to be UK-led. They're organized, in, as I said, in domains around disease areas. They can bring in external collaborators. So we've announced a sort of set. So far, there's a domain for each of the cancer areas, there's a domain for each of the rare disease areas, a number of cost-cutting domains, then an ethics and law. So these, of course, there isn't really large-scale data in this infrastructure yet. There's just the pilot data. So these will get going towards the end of the year as the data is coming out of the genome medicine centers. And these are the companies that have signed up to be part of the Gene Consortium. One other thing, a certain amount of this money was set aside for education, so there is also a national program structured around MSCs across universities, which also is a set of modules. In some ways, you'd like the whole of the health service, 1.4 million people in England, to be aware of genomics as this gets adopted. This is the sort of first step towards that. So these questions about genomic, about the Global Alliance, certainly Genomics England is a member of the Global Alliance. In terms of the infrastructure inside our data center, we're seeing that since we expect people to bring software into that environment, as that software starts supporting Genomics Global Alliance APIs, we'd want to implement those APIs inside that infrastructure. In terms of data sharing, well, we can do some things. Now, I think as you and as various people have said over time, you've got on one side, you've got research consortia, which you can have a protocol which allows redistribution of data. But we're on the health service side. The health service data, it's full patient records. We're getting it to the point where you can do research, but you can't take the data away. And so this means that in terms of federating, that's the criteria. It's got to have no leakage. So we can implement beacons. We can probably implement Matchmaker at level 1, but not level 2 because that would leak the raw data. So that's the kind of current position in terms of data sharing. I think in terms of barriers, well, there's a lot of things the Global Alliance is doing, and I think it's got pretty good coverage. Possibly the only gap is stuff around implementing in a health system, which is kind of what another group, G2MC, has been looking at, which might be something that the two could work together more closely on. Thanks.